I'm back with Reese Halter, and we're about to discuss illegal whaling in protected areas around Antarctica. How are you doing, Reese?
I'm great.
Uh, it's good to catch up with you again. And one of the things I was reading all your articles on whaling, and one statistic that really jumped out at me was that 13 million people from 119 countries paid $2.1 billion to see whales in the wild. I mean, that's an incredible statistic. The first question I would like to ask is, are we evolving from hunters into observers?
Thankfully, Nick, we certainly are evolving. And if we can look at it from an economic point of view, that is an amazing amount of dollars and even more so, an amazing amount of people that are beginning to appreciate and give gratitude for nature. These are jobs that are being created, the numbers are continuing to grow, and there's a lot of hope. We have to. We have slaughtered well over a couple million whales
Wow.
in the last couple hundred years.
You know, we know that whale hunting still goes on, and who are the main culprits today? And can you tell us a bit about how they're operating?
The main culprit is Japan. Norway, Iceland, and Denmark are also in this pack of thieves, poachers, I like to call them. The International Whaling Commission in 1986 put a world moratorium on commercial whaling. And Japan, under the auspice of scientific research, which is flummery, has doubled their quota, their arbitrary quota, now to 955 minke whales plus 50 endangered humpback and another species. It's not coming to mind right now, but well over 1,000 they illegally taking in two regions, the North Pacific and the Great Southern Ocean Sanctuary, whale sanctuary in the Southern Hemisphere. It is extremely disturbing. This is not subsistence hunting. That is the whale meat, which incidentally, under the auspice of lethal research, is being taken, and then the actual meat is being sold onto the market. The Japanese people are not eating the whale meat. There's over 6,000 metric tons of whale meat that's in cold storage
That's
and
incredible.
continuing to be added. Yeah, no, it's not on.
I'm reading a book at the moment called Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez, and he talks about whaling in the 19th century, which was on a huge scale. There's a bit where he talks about the sensitivity of the whales, and he says it's so sensitive that at a bird's footfall, a whale asleep at the surface will start wildly. The fiery pain of a harpoon strike can hardly be imagined. I just think it's so painful for these quite majestic beasts.
It brings me to tears, actually, because it turns out, Nick, that up until recently, there were human beings who are the only species that were known to have spindle neurons. These are special cells in the brain that we know express love, express emotions, express pain, express intelligence and gratitude. And it turns out that whales have these cells. Whales have larger brains than humans. They have 3 times more of these cells. Whales, as we're discovering, have names in their language. They are able to recognize names. They're able to recognize third parties. And the brutality and the vicious annihilation that the human race has for itself and every other species, it's confounding. Look, we have the ability to wipe every other creature off the face of the earth. The whales, with an equal intelligence to ours in many respects, they have dominion in the ocean, and they don't go around wiping deliberately, viciously other species out. We need a serious reality check. And I want to say this, which is even more disturbing, Nick.
Yeah.
The whales and the dolphins are exhibiting levels of toxicity in their bodies that are so high that if a person did, for whatever the reason it was, to eat whale meat or dolphin meat, they will become very sick and die. The point I'm making here is what we should be doing right now is figuring out where and why these animals are so sick and filled with toxicity, not trying to kill them just because we can.
Well, just going back to that, you said that there's 6,000 cubic metric tons in storage, basically. Yeah. So how, if there's no demand, how does it function as an industry? Well, surely it just would go broke.
Well, yeah. You ever heard of subsidies? Apparently, this industry in Japan is rife with subsidies, right. And they have a sense of entitlement, and they feel that if they capitulate and back down from whaling, that the Sea Shepherd and other groups will say, "Well, you've got to slow down your other marine species harvest intake. In other words, you got to slow down on fishing." It's a no-brainer, Nick. We're running out of fish, and by the way, the Japanese attempt to justify what they're doing by saying that the whales and dolphins are eating all their fish. They have to eat the whales and dolphins. That is a truckload of tripe.
Yeah. Just to summarize. We've got a system of slaughter. It's protected by subsidy. It operates under the auspices of scientific research. It's hunting in supposed sanctuaries. They need now to be held to account. And one of the people that you've been following is the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. Can you tell us a little bit more about
They are a direct action group, and I would urge every listener to donate to them. Paul Watson, their fearless founder and leader for the last almost 4 decades, has put his life on the line again and again as a direct action person to protect the whales. Phenomenal, in my opinion, and I've been in conservation for over 3 decades. There isn't any group that's finer. They operate on a shoestring budget. They get the job done. And my upcoming book, Shepherding the Sea, will, at great lengths, explain what they're doing. Phenomenal group, and they're out there standing on the line to actively protect nature. And there's a little known. It's interesting. In 1982, the United Nations passed the World Charter for Nature, and Sea Shepherds are using this World Charter as their modus operandi for justification. And they welcome the Australian Navy to come down to the Great Southern Ocean Sanctuary, where the 3 oceans meet around Antarctica, and help them. And so far they haven't, but the International World Court later this year will hear the charges that New Zealand and Australia have brought against the Japanese for illegal whaling in the ocean sanctuary. The commercial whaling has come to an end 50 years ago. The real disturbing thing, Nick, is that most of the whale species have not recovered.
Yeah.
And so that is the big litmus. There were 1.5 million humpback whales.
Right.
A couple hundred years ago. There's no more than about 15,000 left on Earth. Wow. They have not come back. And the blue whales, it's the same story with the largest living animal now and ever on Earth. Blue whales have not come back. They're about 1% of their former numbers on Earth. It's got to end.
And as we understand it, the whaling boats now have armed coast guards on their ships. Is that right?
Yeah. The Japanese brought in a world demilitarized no-kill sanctuary zone. The Japanese were brought down full armament, and one of the Japanese icebreakers met them down there this past season. Yeah. This past season was noteworthy because the sea shepherds and their conservation efforts precluded the Japanese from getting about 85% of their catch. They took home 103 minke whales. About 50, 60 of them were females, and they all had fetuses within. So they got 103, but they saved over 900. So from the harpoon, and as you mentioned, these harpoons they're driven into the beast, which feels excruciating pain.
Yeah.
And then as the beast is winched back to the boat, they run high amounts of electricity through the cable. But it still takes about 15, sometimes 20 minutes for the animal to die. Right. And the death in a registered slaughterhouse, this would be the most cruel form of killing an animal that is allowed on Earth. So the whole thing is just off.
You've written about, apart from their awe-inspiring beauty, that they actually contribute to sort of life systems on Earth.
Oh my gosh,
Can you
yes.
elaborate on that?
The whales are phenomenal in so many different respects, but let me just bring to the listeners' attention one. Whales, humpback whales, when they feed deep down into the oceans, on the krill and the microorganisms and the plants, the phytoplankton, as they come to the surface, they release their liquid feces, their poo, and they are what we call upward biologic nitrogen pumps, extraordinaire. These things are so exquisite at fertilizing and taking the nutrients deep down and bringing them to the surface. And the listeners may say, well, that sounds all sort of sciencey, whoop-de-doo. Well, let me bring it to your attention. That massive amount of nitrogen is what feeds phytoplankton at the surface.
Yeah.
There's nothing like, we don't have anything like this. We don't know anything like this except the whales. And by the way, whales, because they're upward biologic pumps, they create food for fish, so they actually are building ecosystems. They're not ripping them down. How do you like that, Japan?
Yes, indeed, yeah. And leads me quite nicely on to my last question, really. This whole thing about whales singing. They sing when they're multitasking, and they sing when they're making love. I mean, that's something that we can actually learn from them again, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And Nick, what is a crying shame? Humans are creating not only such terrible organochloride poisons and pesticides that are running off into the oceans. There's so much noise in the ocean from boats and propellers, and the U.S. Navy has created and invented a low sonar sound that is the most detrimental, evil thing. It shatters their eardrums. It causes internal hemorrhaging and bleeding. Why do you think, Nick, and listeners, that we continue to see beautiful whales washed up on shore?
Yeah.
That's because the human noises are shattering their eardrums. They are discombobulated. They wind up on the shoreline with bleeding eardrums and death. 500,000 years ago, the oceans were vibrant with the most ethereal noises and songs that would travel 1,000 miles. And the animals were able to, and are able, over a period of a decade, to change their song. And so from one decade to the next, their entire language metamorphosizes into a different kind of language. It's constantly changing. Oh, it's exquisite.
Basically, we should leave them in peace.
Basically, we should leave all creatures in peace, and particularly the dolphins and the whales.
Thanks, Reese. I mean, this is a huge subject and a really interesting one.
Yeah, we'll come back to it.
Especially as this is an important year with the Sea Shepherd and everything. I hope everyone goes and checks the Sea Shepherd website.
Yes, seashepherd.org.
Thanks very much, Reese, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Cheers, mate.
Take care.